Good morning. I'm Marilyn Hamilton, and it's my privilege and honor to welcome you to our session this morning. I'm the co-chair, along with J.R. Fulton, of the Local Place Plan. And I want to welcome you to our fifth exploration for the Local Place Plan for the Park Ecovillage Findhorn. Today's focus is on the economy and education. Earlier, all of the people at the tables tuned in and had a minute of silence. I think that would be really appropriate for everyone who's in the room right now. So let's just take a pause and have a minute of quiet to arrive from wherever we've come from. Thank you. Perfect recall. Thank you. And maybe now that you know that phone's on, you could turn it off. Thank you. So we're delighted, the Local Place Plan, today to collaborate and amplify both our research with the community and our relationship with the Enterprise Day. 10 weeks ago, on June the 30th, we held our first open house, or Fair for Infrastructure. 6 weeks ago, on July the 28th, we explored housing all day, from a walking attunement to charrettes focused on housing for Pine Ridge. We also gave 6 presentations, including the Gen Dimensions, which we'll hear more about, and a witnessing circle. 4 weeks ago, we continued our housing inquiry with another mapping session for the whole of the Park Ecovillage Findhorn. And just 2 weeks ago, we shaped an inquiry into our environment and resilience. We are delighted to be back today because the economy is like the energy system, both visible and invisible, connecting all of the dots of the enterprises, organizations, groups, and individuals, both inside and outside the park. The Enterprise Day today makes visible to us many of the dots, and your registration connections, where we gave you pink ones and green ones, allows you to identify with all the enterprises here. Are you a customer or even a supplier to them? And between the enterprises, we also ask them to do B2B, connecting the dots. All this will happen in the main auditorium, so it addresses many of the questions we are holding about the Park Ecovillage Findhorn's economy within the Local Place Plan. One observation we have had about the park economy is that it is very mixed. We have strong energies for the arts and community-based education and organic growing or permaculture. Our last session out in the hinterland and gardens opened our eyes to the nature-based learning we have become famous for around the world. Many of the arts opportunities are represented on the auditorium floor and fair today. Downstairs today, in the lower foyer, we have open space for us to explore the education stream of our economy. We invite you to visit all day, and then again after the presentation here at 13:43 or thereabouts. Come downstairs and look at the Education Circle's many initiatives and connections to the new website, Visit Ecovillage Findhorn. We also invite you to explore how form follows function for a community center, and talk shop with the Phoenix about imagining a new shop. I want to say thanks to all of your responses to the infrastructure and housing surveys that we've been circulating, and we're about to release a new one on the environment. And we have just drafted one that's going to be releasing the chapters 1 and 2 of our Local Place Plan, and anyone can send us comments or questions or feedback. In fact, I printed out a copy downstairs if you want to come and have a look at that. We thank you for reading our regular articles in the Rainbow Bridge and linking to our recordings of all the meetings that we've been having with the working group, with the feedback group, with our NFA and THA connections. After today's explorations, we will plan with NFA and Colchi community-wide organization deep community engagement for the draft Local Place Plan. So thanks for coming today. And I want now to turn this over to Tessa Brock, who's with us as Director of EF and the specialist on the Gen Dimensions. And then she will introduce our keynote speaker, Jonathan Dawson, who is our friendly economist returning to Findhorn from his days at Schumacher. So Tessa, I hand it over to you. lead us on.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning. And yes, welcome to the Ecopia Enterprise Fair. I'm Tessa, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you all today. For those who don't know me, I'm working closely with the local place plan, and I've been consulting on the Gen Dimensions, which have proven to be an incredibly useful tool for ecovillages and ecovillage development. And in addition to that, I'm part of the community visioning group, helping to craft a shared purpose and community aims. And I'm also on the board of Ecovillage Findhorn, the CBS. So today we're celebrating enterprise as well as education. And as we've been doing throughout the LPP process, we have been using the Gen Dimensions. And we're going to bring in that theme again today, the Gen Dimensions of regeneration. And we've been using them as a common language between all the organizations represented here at the Park Ecovillage Findhorn, and bringing across the concept of regeneration, which is just one step further from sustainability, which is another word people might be more familiar with. But regeneration is where we are actively healing, we are restoring and improving our environments, our ecosystems, and the communities we live in. It's giving back more than we take. So it's not just sustainable, but it's regenerative. As a community, we've been using the Gen Dimensions for many months now, and it's a tool created by ecovillages, in ecovillages, and for use for communities. And it's helping us to create clarity in our communities as well as a direction. And the Gen Dimensions of regeneration give us a framework to build this future. And they cover 4 key areas: economic, ecology, social, and cultural, and brought all together with an integral framework. And today you will see how the different organizations who are represented here fit into those dimensions, looking at the different ways that we fit into these dimensions and how we are all important parts of one whole. So just a little introduction into each of the dimensions, which you might see aspects of that in the organizations that are represented here today. In the economic dimension of regeneration, this is where we are looking beyond just making money. We're looking at creating resilient and localized economies that are equitable, inclusive, and ensuring that everyone in the community can thrive. Organizations in this dimension might include cooperatives, local businesses, and social enterprise. These are the groups working to keep wealth circulating within the community, providing fair wages, supporting local producers, and prioritizing the well-being of people over profit. Today, you'll meet enterprises that focus on sustainable finance, fair trade, ethical investments, and resource-sharing models. The aim here is to foster a thriving local economy, even in the face of global uncertainties. Next, we have ecological regeneration. In the ecological dimension, we focus on how we can restore and live in harmony with the natural world. This is about healing the damage that has been done to our ecosystems, protecting biodiversity, and finding ways to reduce our ecological footprint. Organizations that fit into this dimension are often involved in land stewardship, renewable energy, permaculture, and conservation. They might also focus on projects like reforestation, water management, and organic farming. These organizations help us remember that that we are not separate from nature, but deeply interconnected with it. In terms of cultural regeneration, it's about reviving and celebrating our shared values, our creativity and heritage. It focuses on the stories we tell, the traditions we honor, and the arts we create, all of which give meaning and depth to our lives and live together as a community. Organizations in this dimension might include artistic groups, cultural collectives, and heritage organizations. These are the groups working to keep our cultures vibrant, ensuring that we are not only building sustainable infrastructure, but also nurturing the heart and soul of our communities. And lastly, social regeneration. The social dimension is all about building trust, cooperation, and community resilience. This is the human side of regeneration, creating spaces and systems where people feel included, supported, and empowered to contribute to the whole. Social organizations are often involved in areas like education, health, conflict resolution, and community building. They work to ensure that everyone, regardless of their background or status, has access to the resources that they need. So as you explore today's fair, you'll see that all the organizations here have been placed into these dimensions, helping to give a sense of how they contribute to the larger picture of regeneration. In addition to everything happening in the Universal Hall, as Marilyn has said, I would like to encourage you to visit the lower foyer, where there will be 3 LPP processes happening throughout the day. And these are open consultations where you can have your say on the community center inquiry, the Phoenix Shop inquiry, and the education circle. We will also be having a fascinating panel discussion today at 3:30 here in the hall, the Honoring Life Cycles, where we'll be exploring the beginnings, the middles, and the endings of organizations. And this promises to be a rich discussion about how organizations evolve over time, a real exploration of growth, transformation, and sometimes closure. It's going to be deeply insightful, and I hope you'll join us for that. And lastly, everyone should be registered here today, and if you're not, do collect your tags. We want to really connect the dots as to who's using what services and who's providing what services to the different organizations. And hopefully we can create a wonderful infographic where we can see the supply chains and the systems that we are all linked to in terms of our enterprises here in the park. So just some quick housekeeping points. Please familiarize yourself with the exits. We have our emergency escapes at that door, this door, and that door. Which one's not an emergency escape? Yeah, 10 points. Great. The toilets are just over here. And I remind everyone that we do have a really busy schedule full of juicy things. Let's keep to respectful timekeeping. And of course, there'll be many breaks during the day. Please make use of that by going to the Phoenix Cafe. And at 12 o'clock, La Boheme will also be open, also supplying coffee and pizzas and really good things. And lastly, I want to say thank you so much to the core team. This day wouldn't be possible without you. And that is Facile, Lorraine, Cornelia, George, Marilyn, Edward, and Jane Duncan-Rogers. And also a big thank you to Pia and Evert, our event coordinators for the day. And also just thank you to all the volunteers, the people doing the registrations, the ushers, all the participants, everyone else who's helping here today. Thank you so much. Finally, we are very honored to have Jonathan Dawson, who is the creator and lead lecturer of the Renewable Economics Masters at Schumacher College, a longtime fellow of this community, and our keynote speaker, fellow host. I'm excited to be working with you today, and I'm sure you will all inspire us moving forward. Thank you so much.
So it's always great to come back home. Thank you so much for the invite. Um, this is my first post-Dawson visit to the community. And I'm feeling, I feel a bit tearful actually. We were close. It feels like the world is a slightly emptier place for her no longer being in it. So I just want to acknowledge the work that Dawson has put in this community. For much of the, so I lived in Findhorn for much of the first decade of this century, and during that period, for most of it, I was working with the global Ecovillage network, either as the coordinator of GEN Europe or the president of the international board, the international GEN International. I think I need to say that I'm wearing another hat here, which is the hat of those who are sitting with Parkinson's disease, who are finding ways of working with it. So I just want to bring that up front because I can feel it's part of my ongoing relationship with my health to work consciously with this disease. Breathe with me, please. So during that decade, most of the time I was working with the Global Ecovillage Network, and it was a period where I often found myself describing myself as being a devout skeptic in terms of ecovillages, which some found to be a little inconvenient since I was holding this poster of really just promoting ecovillages. But my feeling was that there were the golden age of ecovillages had happened in the 60s and 70s when communities like this were created, where there were a number of factors that enabled that no longer exist today. So one, in that period during the 60s, the land was cheap and available. Planning was very relaxed. There was a very utopian zeitgeist. None of these things apply today. And so my analysis led me to believe that the baton for community, for radical community organization had passed largely from the global ecovillage, from the ecovillage family to the transition family. And I was very comfortable with that. It felt like I was noticing in our training programs here and elsewhere that most of the people coming to do training based like Gaia education, based on derived from ecovillage experience, were more interested in going back to their home places and taking the principles that they had learned from the ecovillage experience than necessarily creating new ecovillages. So, so I'd come to this pretty comfortable conclusion, this analysis I was pretty comfortable with, that actually ecovillages, so for 24 of the last 25 years, I've lived in ecovillage context in 3 different communities, including this one. So clearly, I am a believer in them being really interesting, innovative places, exciting places to live in, full of dynamism and creativity. My reservations had to do, as I say, with the fact that it seemed that the world had changed, and that that while the ecovillage experience could be of relevance to the wider world, I had severe reservations about the degree to which it provided a model that many people were likely to choose. I'm beginning to wonder if my skepticism was a little premature, beginning to revise that perspective. And I'm revising it on the basis of 2, can we get the first slide, please? So two voices challenged that story in me. The first one was, this is my buddy Albert Bates, who has been he's been one of the key drivers of the Ecovillage movement in North America, Ecovillage Network of the Americas. And his perspective was that there may be something behind my analysis, but how would, is this working? Microphone. Pin to the microphone. I'd much rather be roaming, but this hadn't thought of it. Good. So Albert Bates, his observation was that it could be that when we were having these discussions 20 or 30 years ago, maybe there was some validity, but could it be that in the context of significant breakdown in society, that actually the role of the eco-village could once again become more pronounced? And I've been sitting with that idea for several decades, wondering, like, mulling over Albert's perspective. The second person who has really influenced my thinking more recently is another friend, a Guarani Indian from southern Brazil called Vanessa Andreotti. And she threw out this really interesting provocation in a paper recently, where she said, if you were to connect at the level of guts and bones with what your head has already accepted in terms of the severity and imminence of the crisis, if you were to really take what you already know at a head level, an intellectual level, into your bones and guts as to the severity and the imminence of the crisis before us, what would you do? So I found this to be a very thoughtful, provocative, like really appealing to, not to my intellect, but to my guts. And where I went to immediately with this question was ruptured supply lines and empty supermarkets, and a civilization supremely ill-equipped to deal with that scenario. So I think my head has already very much, when I look at the range of crises before us, my head engages. The challenge here was to really feel into my being, what would I do? How could we respond? How can we preempt? How can we build structures that will see us through the coming period? And to really feel this with a passion that isn't just intellectually distanced, but to really feel it and to become more empowered through the feeling of it. Good. So, I find it disturbingly easy to imagine the different scenarios that would catalyze the kind of change that we're coming into. So the scientists tell us that that there are more pandemics almost certainly on the way. The war between Russia and Ukraine, like two of the great breadbasket countries feeding the world through their exports of grain. A whole range of, I find it easy to imagine where these tipping points could be that would translate, that would change full supermarkets into empty supermarkets. And so, I'm going to slip behind the desk. Yeah. So we live in an economy, we live in a society that has traded over recent decades, that has traded efficiency against resilience. We've built systems that are hyper efficient, just-in-time delivery systems for the supermarkets, financial systems that are hyper efficient but desperately vulnerable to shifts in the system. I mean, I think we saw what happened to the supermarkets when the pandemic kicked in. I think it was a really interesting pre-warning of what's coming in terms of our the vulnerability of our hyper-efficient systems to interruptions in the system. So the question then that I presented to myself is, what would I do? Like, thinking of my kids, of my grandkids, what would I do that would begin to build networks that might stand, that might prove strong enough to withstand, or in some measure to actually hold the net of connectivity, to enable us to provision for ourselves in the face of the crises that are coming. it's one of the things with Parkinson's is the brain doesn't work quite as quickly as it used to. I hope you're with me. Thank you. Did this talk in my head this morning, it flew by and very quickly. Good. So there is a great global division of labor with different tasks allocated to different countries, different regions. Think of those areas that are very much dependent on tourism, for example. Somewhere like Mallorca, which has been in the news recently. Okay, I think the point has been made that actually we've built a global economy that is highly dependent on all the bits working. And it's disturbingly easy at the moment to see various scenarios under which they would stop working. So how then does this relate to the Ecovillage story? And it seems to me that given that context, given the context that is before us, that it could be that the Ecovillage, that the role of these centers of radical community self-organization that are also not just in terms of governance, but also in terms of economic activity, are beginning to build resilience back into their systems. So that's easily said, how to do it. And I think that the first way in for me is a really interesting visual metaphor developed by the New Economics Foundation in London called the leaky bucket. So the invitation is to see our local economies as being buckets filled with holes. So lots of money is coming in the form of salaries, welfare payments, remittances, other wealth coming in. But because we provide for so few of our own needs, that money leaks out of the bucket almost immediately, not shaking any hands on the way out. So if you calculations done by the New Economics Foundation of the amount of money that recycles in the economy when communities are providing for their own needs, significantly greater multiplier purchasing power remaining within the community relative to what happens in the local supermarket, where the great majority exit the local system almost immediately. So this idea of, I find it very useful educationally, the idea of the leaky bucket. That there's one Italian eco-village called Damanhur that certainly used to, I think they probably still do, an annual and end of year audit of where money is leaking out of the local economy, that they could begin to provide, help each other to create enterprises to plug these leaks. So more really, we're looking at trying to find ways of developing economic structures that will enable us to keep the wealth within the community rather than having it leaking out. Really interesting work done by an organization called the Zero Emissions Research Initiative. I think Gunter Pauli has probably been to this community. Gunter Pauli was the core leader here. And what he's done, he's taken permaculture principles and tried to apply permaculture principles to the world of economy. So particularly the principle that the waste from one system becomes the nutrient, the feed for the additional systems. So they began working with beer production, trying to apply the principle that I'm noticing that in the production of beer, there was a big generation of waste product that was simply becoming a disposal problem. And the question he asked was, could we turn that waste circuit into new products. And so they again, at the beginning, it was a very basic map, which it became ever more sophisticated as they began to explore ways in which the spent substrates would feed into various other economic activities by keeping the flow of the wealth local. They did that in beer. Also, you can see that in coffee. Again, exploring ways in which what previously had been a waste disposal problem became actually the nutrients for all sorts of new activities. So in coffee, the waste product becoming animal feed, the creation of mushroom production. And so this has inspired much work that's been done in the meantime in terms of diversifying the economy and translating waste feeds into new economic activities. We're in the realm here of enterprise clusters. So again, this is one of a more sophisticated mapping of economic activities in an enterprise cluster in Mexico and Durango, where again, just from the principle of exploring how the waste stream coming from certain economic activities becoming the nutrient, the stock feed for others. So UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, picked up this idea. It's got a small and medium enterprise cluster development program that I used to work for. A really interesting feature of this, I'm beginning to explore how do we move from the global picture where we can feel very small and how on earth could we make a difference given the fact that the global problems are so big. Here, this is the first example I want to show of how these ideas of diversifying and enriching, building resilience within a local economy can apply at the local level. So this, the SME, Small Medium Enterprise Cluster Development Program, I think in the 10 years that I worked in Africa, was probably the most effective, cost-effective, and elegant project type that I worked with, depended on the role of a cluster broker. So within a cluster of enterprises, the role of the cluster broker is to identify potential for collaboration between different, to be like a spider building a web between the different players within the cluster. I want to suggest that the local economy here could be seen as being something of a cluster. There's lots of different enterprises, many of which are creating links that rather than buying externally or selling externally, are consciously or unconsciously building a web of relationships within the local community. And the role of the cluster broker in spotting the potential for linkages between local actors and suggest and building connectivity between them is significant, I think, in this local context. So this is one of my students, Zoe, who's been involved in something called FibreShed. The FibreShed is it's an attempt to build a network in this particular case, it's in the southwest of England, but it's to build a network in which all of the producers involved at every stage in fibre production. How long have we got? 5 minutes. So creating a conscious network over an area that all of the processes involved in in fiber production, in garment production, be in relationship to each other. So you've got producers from the breeders of sheep right through to the processing, right through to the dyeing, and the fashion houses building a network, building a system that is not dependent on outside global players. I think what we're talking about here is moving from economies of scale to economies of scope. Economies of scale being the idea that unit cost drops the higher the production, to profitability and resilience builds from working within a network, within a system. So I haven't left myself much time for this, but this really is the bit that I wanted particularly to share with you. This is the Local Entrepreneur Forum is it's something that was created by my teaching buddy at Schumacher College, Jay Tomt, and it's built on, it's based on the Dragon's Den concept, where every year, there's been 12 consecutive years, we've run the Local Entrepreneur Forum, where a number of locally owned either startups or already established organizations that want further investment pitch to a community of friendly dragons who are invited to see themselves as, even those who don't have any money, as investors. There's so many ways in which we can invest in our communities, financially and other than financially. And we created a network map of the various linkages that have been created between the different organizations that have pitched. And I think this really, Totnes is a little bit the Findhorn of the South. There's a lot of interest in these kind of ideas. And I think this behind me represents what I really aspire communities like Findhorn to be moving towards, is to actually consciously, like having felt in our guts and in our bones the seriousness of the crisis and the need to build resilience into systems from now, is to consciously map the networks, the potential for building networks internally within a system, rather than, and lessening their dependence on global supply chains that are highly vulnerable. So I'm just going to let you read this. So Rob Hopkins, co-founder of the Transition Movement, has said he reckons this is one of the big ideas to come out of transition that really could make a difference. I wanted just in closing to remember a night in this community in, it was a cold, snowy February evening. The Phoenix shop had run a deficit for 3 consecutive years. That we really recognized the danger of what would happen to the community if we lost the shop. And I think there were maybe 200, 250 shareholders, of which I was one at that stage, who owned shares in the Phoenix. And most of us, I reckon there might have been 150 people, met that February evening. And I remember coming out of the meeting feeling euphoric. It felt like the most exciting, active engagement in local economic democracy that I'd ever seen, as people either let go of their discount, or provided money for prepayment to provide working capital, or provided babysitting, or lots of things that were actually would enable the shop to stay open, and it did. So I'm just going to finish by saying that the gibbering wreck you see before you is not the one, it's not how it feels on the inside, and I'm working, thank you for providing me with an opportunity to work with ways of remaining a functioning human being.